My teenage son has been eating more than normal. At first I thought it was puberty, but now I think it's cannibalism. I knew it had gotten worse when he started consuming his white goo. This wasn't normal. It was 8 a.m. and he hadn't even come down for breakfast. It's tough being a single mom of a teenage boy. I don't complain. Hell no, I love my son. Jacob's done nothing but make my life better for the most part. As a little one, he was always so quiet, loving story time and reading books. He had always a higher reading level than most kids his age, something which I always encouraged. We made weekly trips to the library where he'd bolt to look at the books, not even pausing to look at the movie section. As he became older, he started coming out of his shell, making friends, but he was still my sweet boy. He always did the dishes without being prompted, was always home at a good time, and always told me what was going on in his life. When he told me his friend was considering suicide, we worked together to help that friend out. A few months ago, everything changed. I don't know what triggered the change, but it was a day and night change. I could normally go to work and trust Jacob to be out of bed ready to go. He loved school and was excited he was finally a sophomore. It was almost time for me to go to work and he hadn't so much as opened his bedroom door. I was naturally concerned. I thought he was sick. I hurried up to his bedroom and knocked a few times asking if he was okay. His response shocked me. F school, I'm tired. First off, Jacob wasn't the type to use harsh language around me. I don't care what he said around his friends, just watch his mouth with his mother. I knocked harsher before opening the door. Jacob wasn't sick. He was twisted up in his blankets, only his mop of hair and the top of his face sticking out the top. He glared at me. Go away. Jacob might have grown taller than me over these past few years, but I was no pushover. I ended up pulling him out of bed by his blanket. It took a bit of pushing, but he did end up marching into the bathroom to get dressed and showered. I figured it was one of those teenage things. A phase, mood swing, whatever. Jacob had gone through a few phases as a child. One where he refused to sleep anywhere but my bed. The monster under his bed was going to get him, and don't get me started on his cowboy phase. It was months before he stopped wearing those stupid boots. But this was different. This was rebellion. The next day I was already running late to work, so I didn't check to see if Jacob had gotten out of bed. I was on my lunch break when I got a text from Jacob's girlfriend, Marissa. Hey, Ms. Hensley, how's Jacob doing? Confused, I texted back and asked what she meant. Her reply sent my blood pressure through the roof. He's sick today, right? That's why he's not in school? I used the rest of my lunch break to go home, and sure enough, Jacob hadn't gotten out of bed. Still twisted up in blankets, although he wasn't asleep. He was playing some sort of game on his phone. Busted. I marched him to school after giving him time to shower and dress, telling him how I was disappointed in his actions, and if something was wrong, he could talk it over with me. In response, I got an eye roll and an excuse about being tired. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what was going on in Jacob's head. This is when everything went downhill. Library trips stopped happening. It was a miracle to get him out to do anything but eat on the weekends. And my God, did he eat. I set aside a foot-long sub for my dinner in the fridge and went out to water the garden. By the time I was back, the sub was gone, along with a family-sized bag of potato chips and a 2-liter of Pepsi. The latter two were his, so that was none of my business. But the sandwich was mine. Jacob had never taken my food before. I was hurt. At first I thought this was just a one-time thing, and I was convinced it was after he told me he was going to do a half marathon. But I was wrong. He was doing a half marathon of eating food. His appetite became voracious over the weeks. On days I knew he went to school, he would pack his own lunch but eat whatever the cafeteria had as well. And judging by the payments the school gave me, he was eating everything he could fit on those plastic trays. He obviously gained weight, and although he was never a skinny kid, he's now so large he's having a bit of trouble buckling himself in when he's in the car. What's worse is how he shut me off. We were so close for so long. We hid nothing from each other. He told me about his crushes on girls or when he was feeling depressed. I told him whenever I had a bad day at work or when I met a nice guy on a dating website. Last night was one of the worst of my life. He came home with the cops. I had no idea he was gone. I was frosting the cake for his birthday when I saw the blue and red flashing lights in the driveway. For several achingly long moments, I thought my son was dead. Then the door opened and Jacob came out, the cop walking him to the house. I ran to the front door, dropping the chocolate frosting bag in my rush. I opened the door and pulled Jacob into a hug so tight I probably could have snapped him in two. The hug was not returned. Ma'am, can we step inside and have a talk? The cop adjusted his belt and looked stern. Of course I let him in. Jacob sat beside me as the cop explained what happened. Jacob had been hanging out with a few sketchy individuals. They had trespassed into a condemned building and started being a general nuisance, throwing things around, playing loud music. Jacob was the only one that didn't get away. The other hoodlums were too quick. Jacob was getting off with a warning. This time, when the police left and it was just me and Jacob, I broke down. I sobbed, begged to know why. Just why was he doing this? I wanted my boy back. I wanted to go to the library with him again, read his favorite books, laugh like old times. I think my tears got to him. I saw a bit of the old Jacob in his face as he rested his hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom. He looked in the kitchen. How about we have some cake and just hang out, okay? He smiled. We ended up polishing off the cake together. We didn't talk about anything serious, just something Jacob had watched on TV he thought was a hoot. It was really. I laughed until my sides hurt. I worried about him, but for a brief hour I thought that maybe he was back to normal. It's almost 12 now. He hasn't even stirred. I haven't heard him walk around. I got up and headed upstairs. I wanted to talk about his behavior. I wanted to know what the hell was going on. I knocked on his door. Jacob, are you awake? No response. I frowned and knocked again. Jacob, I hope you're decent. I slowly opened the door. The blanket lay on the floor, shredded and covered in a thin layer of a shiny ooze. I looked at the bed and shrieked. Jacob was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was this bubble. That's the best way to put it. A murky, reddish-brown bubble. I ran up to it, and now up close I could tell where Jacob was, inside. He was curled up like a fetus, his eyes were closed, and he was completely naked. I couldn't tell if he was even breathing. I screamed and started to claw at the bubble's wall, desperate to get him out. It was an impossible task. The bubble's surface was thick and wouldn't give. As I watched, helpless, I saw the skin on Jacob's back start to peel off. Layer by layer, I saw skin, muscle, bone. He was melting. I screeched and pounded harder against the bubble, screaming Jacob's name as he liquefied in front of my eyes. His gut practically exploded with fat, which succeeded in further clouding my view of him. Before his head was consumed, his eyes opened. He looked at peace. No more pain. No more exhaustion. He smiled before the flesh on his face was consumed, leaving behind a grinning skull that too vanished. I sunk to the slime-covered floor, my shaking legs unable to support me any longer. My son was changing. After several moments, I rested my hand on the shell of his cocoon and strangely smiled as well. Just a phase, people say. This would be just a phase as well.